Halfsword isn't a game where you can point to a controller and go, press X, B, circle left, half step X, bim bam boom, you win. This is a game of endless variables, and even a perfect strategy can fall apart in a battle of millimeters. This tutorial will take you through learning the absolute basics, from how to swing, dodge, and block, and by the end, we will introduce advanced topics that will feel more natural to do as you practice and gain confidence. So let's begin. I want you to take your preferred weapon. We'll be using a long sword, and pick a medium armor class. Fight until you get a clean win, do whatever you have to do. This version of the game does not have a practice mode, so it might take some time. By holding down left click, we gain control of our character's arms. By moving the mouse around slowly, we move between various guards. These guards are designed to keep the weapon in a defensive position, and is one of the various good reasons why you don't want to constantly swing your mouse around as fast as possible. You can see the sword being held vertically, horizontally, and angularly depending on where we move the mouse, and each position may prove useful when dealing with an aggressive opponent. The side guards will hold the sword in a position favorable for defending slashes and swipes coming from those directions. But it isn't a simple formula, as the position your sword is hit matters too, and you want to keep most block strikes somewhat close to your hands, as attacks blocked at the tip of a blade will easily push aside your weapon and land. Let's move on to strikes. I want you to find any fence post and try moving from a guard to an attack in one or at most 2 movements. A smooth and quick whip motion of your mouse will fling your weapon out quickly. Think of your mouse movements forming various U-shapes, some narrow, some wide, some backwards or rotated, but always a smooth, up and down, or left and right motion. Try moving into or away from the object while still landing the strike. Positioning will become one of your best weapons in a battle, so try incorporating it now so it's less foreign to you later. Landing heavy strikes all the time may seem like the best strategy, but keep in mind, the longer your sword is in a wound-up position, the more open you are to attacks. There is value to small, quick swipes, especially when aimed at vitals like the face, neck, or chest. If there is any strike that feels odd to you, practice it. For me, it's the downward slashes, as I often struggle to aim them properly. Finally, try landing your strikes at different points on your weapon. This can be tricky to do in battle, but damage is variable in Halfsword, and sometimes you may need to adapt your swing to your opponent. Let's move on to thrusts. These are devastating attacks, fast and often deadly. You do these in 2 ways, by double left clicking or by holding Alt, which enters a thrust mode. I prefer using Alt. Your forward guard with most bladed weapons is similar to a thrust position, and you can simply move forward in that guard without using your thrust action. This is especially effective with spears. And just like with strikes, thrusts can be quick and small movements. A quick small thrust to the face can often be all you need to win a fight. Let's move on to something a little more abstract. This is something that few games simulate, but it's very effective in real life, and in Halfsword. That is, smacks. Every single thing in the game can hurt combatants, whether that's running headfirst into a wall and knocking yourself out, or your weapon hand slamming against your opponent's head instead of your weapon. By smacks, I mean that you use any part of your weapon when you see the opportunity, such as the guard or pommel, your own hand, the pole of a spear. It can all be effective in certain circumstances. While they may not defeat your opponent instantly, like a vital strike with a sword would, a well-placed pommel strike to the head can completely knock them off balance, daze them, and change the tides of the fight. Now, how about Halfsword? No, not the game, the act. Halfswording is holding the blade with 2 hands as a different means to attack your opponent. Right-click instead of left-click to enter a half-sword stance, assuming the weapon you are using has one. Now, what can you do here? Halfsword has 3 main applications in my experience: stabbing, especially to the armpits and side, and sawing with the center of the blade, such as at the neck of an opponent in very close range. The final usage is a bit more advanced, but you can grapple an opponent by half-swording around them. From here, you can manipulate, drag, and slam them with some practice. Let's move on to your first exercise. I want you to be a light armor class and drop your weapons by pressing Q and or E as needed. Positioning is one of your best tools in Halfsword, so I want you to simply avoid your opponent while baiting them into attacking you. It's a game of cat and mouse. You'll see me spinning. That's because in Halfsword, there are small ways of gaining momentum, and throwing your body around by spinning or simple rotating around can give you a tiny bit more speed. It's important to bait attacks from your enemy, so try not to get too far out of range during this exercise. See if you can get within inches of an incoming attack without getting hit. It's pretty great, and as you gain more skill, that would be a perfect counterattack opportunity. Okay, now I want you to move to a higher armor class, not the highest, but just below. You will see this big shield after clicking a few times. Go with that, and drop whatever weapon it comes with. We will use this shield as a way to understand the fundamentals of blocking. While having a big shield may make it way easier to block, the basic ideas are the same regardless of what you are using. To put it simply, you want to put your weapon or shield between you and their incoming attack. It may sound easy, and with this big shield it is, but take note of just how fast some of their attacks can be. Right-clicking with a shield equipped will give you control over that shield arm, and I want you to focus on that for this exercise. You need to meet their attacks with the shield. Notice that attacks in Halfsword are physical, meaning that unlike games with pre-canned animation, a simulation of muscles and forces are happening here in Halfsword. That means if your opponent can't move their arm because something is in the way, then they can't attack. With this shield, you can bully and push against your opponent, and if you get their arm caught on the shield, they are effectively harmless. All of these concepts work with a weapon too. You simply have a much smaller object in your hands, and thus the skill required to block is much higher. I wanted to finish this section by showing you the true power of shields. They are blunt and heavy, and can absolutely knock your opponent into orbit. Let's put the last two exercises together and introduce a complex but very important ability, the parry. I want you to pick any medium armor, one that gives you at least a breastplate, and keep giving up the battle until you get a halberd or spear opponent. Do not use the spear opponent with the blade sticking out of the pole. This weapon is very difficult to parry. By using the last two skills we practiced, blocking and positioning, we can begin to understand the nature of parrying a weapon. With the spear or halberd, you have a big area that you can focus on to parry against, while avoiding the relatively small area that can instantly kill you. The spear showcases the need for positioning, as thrusts, especially from a spear, can be very difficult to parry while standing still. So focus on circling or moving backwards and find the right moment to block with your weapon. Remember to focus on small, smooth, but quick movements. Flailing may block your opponent's weapon sometimes, but I want you to practice on your discipline so you can become a quality fighter. Let's move on into some examples of parrying, positioning, and blocking. Sword opponents can be very difficult. Their attacks are very fast and can often be lethal. You want to remain in a defensive guard and anticipate attacks rather than react to them. My opponent is flailing, which may show you why it's a bad idea. The relatively chaotic attacks may seem intimidating, but they have a clear pattern, and any talented fighter will find their timing against it. Although it may be tempting to leap on a wounded opponent, remember that they can still easily damage you, and their weapon is always live, whether it's being swung or simply laying on the ground. You can, and probably will, step on a random sword and take big damage eventually. By pressing R, you can open the weapon wheel. I only really do this to switch from my sword to a blunt weapon, to finish a fight that my opponent really should have conceded to. My opponent has the biggest shield in the game. The problem with it is that it is very unstable. You can see it wobbling around in his hands, and that is a weakness you can take advantage of. As you can see, a simple small movement landed a clean strike near my opponent's face, and we get a big reaction. Clearly, despite doing almost nothing, we did some serious damage. Sometimes these fights can feel like a puzzle. You have an opponent with strengths and weaknesses in front of you, and you need to take what you have and solve it. I begin to realize that my opponent can only really successfully swing attacks from his right side due to his big shield getting in the way, so it gets easier and easier to predict his attacks. I want to stress that during this fight, I'm moving slow and barely attacking. You might be surprised how effective bringing your pace down can be, as long as you're focused. My opponent is fumbling and his shield is clearly a burden by this point. His neck is wide open and I land a vital shot. I wanted to post this section because no matter how good you get in Halfsword, there will always be something to surprise you. Yes, I did just trip on my own 2 feet, fall headfirst into the fence post, and land out of bounds. That's a first. In this next exercise, we will be focusing on positioning again, but instead of simply running away, I want you to find counter-striking opportunities on your opponent. Typically, you want to attack just after them. Your attack will follow right behind theirs, and they will not be able to react in time. When your opponent winds up an attack, they are almost always exposing something. Whether it's their armpit, side, or chest, something opens and you want to strike at that opportunity. Another big shield. My opponent comes at me with the goal of knocking me over. It takes him just too long to return his sword arm back to safety, and I land a counterattack. One of the great things about Halfsword is that you don't have to utterly murder your opponents. They will usually fight until they can't anymore, and then give up. This is a sword duel, and one of my favorite things to do in Halfsword. These battles are really about finding small openings and acting fast. While it's tricky to teach, you control your upper body with your mouse movements, and you can even dodge some attacks by essentially bobbing and weaving, almost like a boxer. I make a small mistake and think that I have a counter, but my opponent sits in his forward guard and I run into it. When attacking, you can do 2 things: crash in or back out. You don't want to just stay in your opponent's attacking range, then the fight becomes a matter of who strikes first, and you can both die very quickly that way. By crashing in, you are too close for clean shots to land. By backing out, you quickly get out of range. Try them both and find what fits your style better. I can't stress enough how well Halfsword handles limb damage. I landed a leg shot earlier, and that damage slowly built up until my opponent couldn't take it anymore. He will now struggle to walk at all.
For the love of God, do me no harm. Let me live. Let not thy hand be heavy upon me.
Now, let's talk about the pocket, which is a boxing term for being in range of an opponent's attack. We are focusing in on an important concept, that is, being just outside of your opponent's range, baiting attacks, and counter-striking. In fist play, there is very little stamina management. Your goal is to find the tiniest openings that your opponent will give you and try to land a few head strikes and back out. Keep your guard up. It's all you have to defend yourself with, and pay attention to your opponent's movements. There is nothing glorious about this mode, but it will prepare you for the chaos you might find yourself in when combat gets messy. And in Halfsword, combat will almost always get messy. On that note, let's talk about bullying. When I say bullying, I mean charging your opponent and knocking them over. When they are on the ground, they can do almost nothing against you, so shoving and pushing them around is a great skill to learn, especially if you prefer shields. Take some real-life advice here. If you control the head, you control the body. Use your shield and shove their head down, and the rest will follow. That's it for part 1 of this tutorial. In part 2, we will be discussing armor and the various differences between them and how to win against each armor class. For now, thank you for watching. If you want to keep following Halfsword, its updates and progress, subscribe and follow my channel.